it's Dr. Bob, and I am here now at the Colorado National Monument. This national monument's not named after the state of Colorado, although that's where it's located, but instead it's named after the Colorado River. That's because the Colorado River traverses this canyon, and for many, many years the story was that that's what carved this canyon. But as you look around, you realize that the little bitty Colorado River that's making its way through this canyon, even with the millions and millions of years, would have not had the destructive force that was required to carve this canyon. And most geologists today agree that that's the case. So how was this portion, which is just like the Colorado River, or the Grand Canyon in many ways, how was this canyon carved? Well, as you look across this great valley, in fact it's called the Grand Valley, as you look across the Grand Valley, on the opposite side of the valley you will also see a series of buttes. And those buttes, as you go up the sides, those buttes replicate the deposits that exist in this side of the canyon as well. So what you realize is that actually this canyon is a small piece of a greater event that happened, which carved out the entire Grand Valley as well as the side tributaries. So while it's very dramatic, the flood that created it would have been even more so dramatic. This is another example, like Mount St Helens, where we visited, and like Vasquez Rocks and other areas, that demonstrate the issues that exist with this idea of uniformitarianism, with the idea that things, as Peter said, that things continue the way that they always have been. And that would be the philosophy of many men in the last days, that they would just say, things continue as they always have. Where is the sign of your coming, Christ? Where is the sign of Christ's coming? Well, what we know is that things are not as they always have been, and that the majority of the forces and the features that we see today are formed by catastrophic features, not by this gradual process. And so just as Mount St. Helens is a great example and really kind of the death knell for this concept of uniformitarianism, where canyons just like this have been created in a matter of hours, not in a matter of millions of years. So these layers are made up of sand deposits. So that leads us then to the discussion of where do we get sand? Sand actually has three origin stories, and we'll cover those really quickly here, and then you can look elsewhere on our site for more details, but really three significant sources for sand. First being the creation event. We know that when God created the earth, that he created all the plants and animals, and he created the soil that was necessary to sustain those plants. And that soil would have been part of the creation event, and so that's one source that we see for the sands that are around us. The second source, which is the one that gets the most credit in the traditional mainstream worldview, is erosion. There is obviously some sand that is created as a result of erosion products. However, if all the sand was a result of erosion, where are these great quartz mountains that are necessary to create the quartz crystals that make up the majority of sand? When you look at this sand, you'll see that it looks red. The actual sand crystals, the quartz crystals within it, are clear. What gives it this red color are the other byproducts, the impurities that exist within that sand, which contain iron byproducts and then cause that red color. And so as you go other places in the world, you'll see the sand has different variations in its color, and that's the result of the impurities in the quartz crystals. Which leads us then to the number one source for sand in the world today, and that is the global flood as depicted in the book of Genesis. The global flood, as the great fountains of the deep were opened up and those waters began to spew forth in their high pressure, the waters that exist deep under the earth exist at high temperature, and they are high in mineral content. In fact, when we go to these deep ocean canyons today, you can still see these fissures that are bubbling up hot, mineral-rich water. And within those minerals are, in many cases, great concentrations of quartz. And so at the time of the Great Flood, as these fountains of the deep open up, you would have had these fissures created, and under high pressure, this mineral-rich water being poured into the surface of the earth. And by that time, you have thousands of feet, up to 9,000 or 10,000 feet of water above these fissures that have opened up. And so you would have had this mineral-rich water spraying into this high-pressure environment, but it is dramatically lower in temperature. So you have a decrease in pressure because it's not coming from deep under the earth, and a rapid decrease in temperature. So as this water is forced up through these crevices, you would have had the creation of aerosols. And aerosols, it's the best example that I can give is you're looking at a can of hairspray and you shake it up, it's largely composed of a liquid and then the gas propellant which exists inside that can. And when you push that valve down on the top and it sprays out, that liquid is forced out at high pressure through a small valve, and then it immediately is entering in this high pressure to low pressure, and it creates an aerosol, and that is these microscopic particles. So you would have had these mineral-rich waters coming up out of the fountains of the deep in this low pressure environment, and they would have aerosolized. The other factor that works with us is what's called nucleation. When you consider that when clouds are passing overhead, and particularly like after a natural fire, wildfire, these dust particles or the smoke particles that are up in the atmosphere will often result in rain. The reason that happens is the smoke particles create a nucleation point, and what that is a disruption in this kind of homogeneous mixture, and that impurity serves as an attachment point for, in the cloud it'd be rain, but in this mineral-rich water it is actually for quartz crystal formation. And so as this mineral-rich water is aerosolized into this lower pressure environment with these nucleation points, what you would have had, it would have looked like, if you were an observer down thousands of feet below the ocean, it would have looked like a sand blow, because it would have just immediately formed all of this sand. Now, how do we know that something like that is what would have happened? As we look at the sand that makes up these deposits, there's an interesting characteristic, and that is that as you look closely at the sand particles, they have sharp edges, sharply defined quartz crystals. What we observe when we go look at sand dunes is that sand that is blown by the wind, those edges are knocked off, and very quickly you end up with these rounded particles. Okay, they're smoother. They don't have these sharp angular edges. Sand that is deposited in water that has been bouncing around in the ocean, so say beach sand, shows less of that, but still there's smoothing. So you notice when you go to a riverbed and you pull up pebbles there that they've become smoothened off. They don't have the rough edges. This tumbling that happens in the water. And then you have the kind of sand that we see in these deposits, which have very sharp, distinct edges, which tells us that these are, for lack of a better word, new quartz crystals. And so the sand that makes up most of these deposits is new sand, very sharp edges, has not had the opportunity to be weathered and to be smoothed out. And so we can tell that these were formed not only in a water environment because they haven't been eroded, but also formed most likely very quickly after they were formed. And so what we see here are the results of these sand depositions for the third kind of sand, the sand that is created in the flood, predominantly. And so once again, in looking at this little small version of the Grand Canyon here at the Colorado National Monument, is another example of why it's okay to believe, and how the evidence all around us points to the truthfulness of God's Word. So again, this is Dr. Bob from the Colorado National Monument saying we'll see you next time.